Hello and welcome back to my video series, Getting Smart About Artificial Intelligence. Today we're going to discuss prediction. In this video, we'll go over some simple explanations of predictive analytics and how prediction can help both you and your organization. Now, when I say prediction, the first thing people think of is some sort of magical crystal ball which allows me to see into the future. But remember, AI is defined as a technology that can imitate intelligent human behavior. So this is less of a magical crystal ball and more of a means of mimicking the human ability to predict. To show this, I'll divide prediction into two sections. The first area we'll look at is estimating an additional value. In this case, we're going to be given some inputs, and we're going to predict what the output would be. Estimating an additional value is all about finding the relationship between the inputs and the outputs. Here's an example. As a viewer, it's highly likely that you may have driven a car over the course of your life. As a driver, you could probably estimate how much money you'd spend on gas if you drove 100 miles. It may seem almost intuitive, but what's going on in our brains is that we're reviewing the history and our experiences as a driver to define that relationship. Our histories and experiences as a driver, that's our training data in this example. And from that, we can extract the relationship between gas costs and miles driven. This is how a computer would do it too. That's why, based on this example, we can see that the relationship ends up being around 33 cents per mile driven. Now, we can get to more complex examples, like having multiple input factors to consider, and in many cases the data does not produce a nice, neat, straight line like this. I don't want to go too deep into the weeds, but with this example, the important thing to remember here is that we are defining the relationship and using that relationship to guess what unknown value might be. The second area of predictive analytics is extending a measurement into the future. This is where I look at the history of a particular measurement and I use that history to decide what a future value might look like. Let's go back to my gas example. Let's say that this chart represents my daily mileage. On day 1, I drive 10 miles, day 2, 5 miles, day 3, 10 miles. I can pretty reliably guess based on that pattern that my usage on day 15 would be 10 miles. You might remember this as those sequence exercises from grade school. Computers can do this too. The computer will try to find a way to mathematically represent that existing pattern. And once it finds one, it can use that mathematical definition to compute what the new future values might be. Let's see how this works in application. Meet Joan. Joan works in the state's Department of Emergency Management and is an amateur data scientist. Joan is responsible for dispatching resources to flood zones in the event of a flood. Joan needs to know when the water level in one of the flood zones is above a foot, so that she can dispatch resources to help. But here's the problem. Joan doesn't have enough budget to place water level sensors in each of the flood zones. She has only 3 IoT sensors, 2 water level sensors on each of the local rivers, and 1 rain gauge that shows how much rain has fallen. Delivering these services are very important to help preserve people's property and lives in the event of a flood. Well, we can use predictive analytics to help Joan solve her problem. Her inputs are her 3 IoT sensors, and she wants to predict what water levels would be in each of the flood zones. So the first thing that she'll need is training data. So Joan will need to go and collect water levels in each of the flood zones manually for a couple days. With this data, Joan can help the computer define the relationship between the IoT sensor readings and the water levels in each flood zone. Once the computer has learned that relationship, it can come out with educated guesses at what the water level in each flood zone is. The benefit to Joan is great, because predictive analytics allows Joan to predict the water level in each flood zone without having to spend money to put a sensor in each one. But that's not the only way that Joan can use predictive analytics. Joan can also benefit from the type of predictive analytics I mentioned earlier, which is predicting a future value. She can use the historical values of water levels to guess what the water level would be in the future. This allows Joan to deploy emergency resources to the flood site before flooding conditions start to help minimize the damage. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you thought it was helpful, please hit the thumbs up button below. In our next video, we're going to do something special. We're going to discuss how you can put some of the concepts that we've talked about in this class into action.